the Raising the Bar podcast, brought to you by the Association of Gray's Inn Students.
Hello, I'm Elena Johnson and welcome to Raising the Bar. We're in Gray's Inn and today we're chatting about tips for senior scholarship applications. We're with Ruby Shrimpton, who is a senior scholar herself. She's in her second six as a pupil at 3 Raymond Buildings, which practices in criminal and public law. And she's going to tell us all about her approach to the senior scholarships. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. My approach sounds a bit grand, I think. I'm not sure whether I have a method, but I can certainly tell you my experience of going through the process and encourage everyone listening to consider going through it themselves.
So I guess the basics first of all. What is a senior scholarship?
Well, there are 4 of them. Lord Reed, which is the scholarship that I won, Lord Atkin, Mould, I think that's pronounced, and Arden. And you don't apply for them individually, so it's 4 awards, but same process. And they are merit-based scholarships, £5,000 each, and they are supposed to be markers of real achievement, which sounds awful saying it as someone who managed to win one. But yeah, so they are like, I suppose, the GDL and BPTC scholarships, but they're not means tested, and they are, you don't have to sign any contract about how you're going to pursue life at the bar. It's really just sort of a recognition that you're on the right track, I suppose.
And the sort of gravity of that recognition, I know you're looking a little bit embarrassed, but as a senior scholar yourself. But they're conferred by the treasurer, aren't they, at the pupil trial exercise? So
yeah.
It's a really impressive thing to have.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a really nice thing to have achieved. And you do get a really nice, or we did in my year, letter. So I had it from the current treasurer, William Clegg, and he wrote us a sort of nice note about previous winners, so Lord Panic, Dinah Rose, QC. Yes. So you feel you're in, illustrious company. Yeah, exactly. So that's really nice. And again, I think it's another way in which Gray's sort of encourages this sense of community beyond the people that you're just sort of on the BPTC with, or maybe doing the pupil course with, but you have this kind of link to, generations of lawyers. It is a nice thing.
Mm. And you have to have started your pupillage before you apply, don't you?
Yes. So you apply around this time, November. I think you've got a couple of months to make the application. It's not a particularly lengthy one, and if you've gone through the application process for the GDL scholarships, or the same with the BPTC ones, then it will be very familiar. The difference is, of course, that you've got to get your reference from a pupil supervisor. I think potentially also your head of chambers, but I can't imagine anyone's going to go to the head of chambers rather than their supervisor. So yeah, you're already doing it, but you won't have, as I say, progressed that far into your pupillage because, most people tend to start September, October, and the latest you can apply, I think, is December, January. So, you're going to have to try and get some good work in early so that people can write you a reference.
So you won't necessarily know your pupil supervisor that well, but I guess don't let that put you off because everybody's in the same position, surely. Yeah,
exactly. And also, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that you don't get one, and they're not going to get an email from the inn saying, your pupil's not exceptional and I can't believe you wrote this reference. They're just not going to hear anything, and they'll forget, quite frankly, because, they're supervising you essentially out of the goodness of their heart, but they're very, very busy and they just won't remember. So if you think about that as being, the worst case scenario, hopefully that's not bad enough to put you off trying.
So it's worth a go.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth a go because if you're anything like me, you'll forget that you have to save for tax. and that can be tricky, especially if you are, crime or another sort of more publicly funded focused set. And of course, as I say as well, it's worth having a go because you might get one, and then you're part of something that feels kind of special, I suppose. The other thing I would say is if you are at a publicly funded set or where your Chambers does a lot of that work, you can also apply for the Anne Goddard scholarships, which are means tested. So they're not just merit; they're merit based in the first instance, and then they consider your means, how much award you're getting, what your outgoings are, and so on. And you're actually not precluded from applying for both, but of course that will lower the amount that you might get under the means tested award. So it's worth considering doing that as well.
So don't let the fact you're applying for one put you off applying for the other.
Yeah, I mean, if with the proviso that you're at a set that's doing that kind of work, traditionally, I think, or this was certainly my impression when I was thinking about applying, the senior scholarships are seen as awards for people at kind of commercial sets or, Blackstones, that kinds of things, because it's, you think of it as being, there's a particular focus on academic achievement, so you think of it really as being sort of for the brainiest, and certainly that was something that made me really consider not applying, and just applying instead for the publicly funded legal aid one. But actually you needn't think like that, and I think I certainly was lucky enough to get both, and I know that another one of the senior scholars is at a set doing predominantly legal aid work. So yeah, you can do both.
And what sort of qualities do you think the interviewers are looking for?
Again, it's very embarrassing to sort of align myself with these kinds of qualities, but I understand that what they're looking for are intellectual ability, so academics, as I say, motivation to succeed at the bar, which is the same quality that pervades all the scholarship applications at every level through the IN. So that might manifest in mooting or, I don't know, writing a journal, article, something like that, being a self-starter. Potential as an advocate at the bar, that is tested by the viva voce examination, which is essentially just a bit of a fancier version of the interview questions you get at the GDL or BBTC level. And then personal qualities, so not being intensely dislikable, I suppose. Yeah.
Always a good tip.
Yeah, that is a good tip for all interviews. If you can avoid being intensely dislikable, it's a good start.
Always a good way to go. So you've mentioned the viva voce, that's part of the application process, isn't it? So there's a paper sift initially for your application. What was your approach to preparing for the paper sift and then ultimately writing your application?
So the paper application, as I say, is not unfamiliar if you've done any of the scholarship processes before. And, that's true not just at the IN, but also if you've done scholarship applications at your law school or whatever, very similar. So, there's a section on what you want to do, your qualities as an advocate. I think there's also a section about how you have been involved or wish to be involved in the life of the Inn, which is always a central part of how Grays chooses to allocate funds, which I think is fair and part of their community mindedness. So really, it may be, to be honest, that you've already written that 2 or 3 times, and it's just a question of updating it or thinking about it, how you've progressed over the last few years. So I don't know if I had any sort of particular approach to that. I think I looked back over my pupillage applications, I looked back at my scholarship applications, and I tried to update them. So no sort of big earthquake. And then I thought about references. So the one thing I did change from my BPTC scholarship application was I had a referee from my law school, bar school, rather than from my undergrad, because they were in a better position to say, Ruby is doing this or that in her development as a barrister, which is not something that my undergrad history supervisor could comment on with any sincerity. So that would be one thing I might encourage people to do, is to update their references.
So think about who's really seen you in action with regard to advocacy. Yeah.
And if you don't feel that you've made a connection with a BBTC tutor, then maybe someone on the GDL potentially, or from your law undergrad, if that applies to you. Yeah.
Thank you. And we actually In the last podcast, we're talking about paper applications and how it's an example of your written advocacy.
Yeah.
And our guest Gemma said that she handed her paper applications to other people to read and how valuable it was to get somebody else's feedback on it. Did you find the same thing?
I did. Do you mean with my own pupillage applications or with this?
With this application,
with
or
this
with applications in general?
I think I probably will have done. I can't recall it doing so last year, but I almost certainly will have done because, like Gemma, I did that with my pupillage applications, and I do think it is invaluable. Partly, even just from a purely administrative perspective, people will spot typos that you just cannot see, and those little things, may not make a huge difference, but they can, especially if whoever's reading it is not in a particularly generous mood, which happens sometimes. You've got to think about that kind of thing. And also people sometimes will encourage you to be less bashful about the way that you express your achievements. Lots of people struggle with that, and the bar in particular can encourage it because you're surrounded by people who seem unspeakably impressive and intimidating, and that can make it can make your own achievements feel embarrassing to write down as achievements, but they are. And I think having other people say, why haven't you included this? Or why have you made this sound as if it was 2 days' work when it wasn't, can be a really helpful influence as well.
So now is not the time to be modest.
Yeah, exactly. And, no one likes blowing their own trumpet. They really don't. But you do have to do it. And not just, to get these kinds of awards, but also in practice, you are a one-man band. You can rely on your chamber's reputation, hopefully. But, maybe you can't in some situations, especially if you're trying to get into an area of practice that they don't necessarily have as much of a foothold in. You're going to have to get used to selling yourself a bit, as uncomfortable as it is. So
it's very possible to sell yourself without being, as you said earlier, an intensely dislikable person.
Exactly. There is a way to say, I've done this, and, to say, I think that means that I have this skill. In fact, don't say I think that means. You can be slightly more assertive than that, without being kind of really obnoxious and as if, don't say I'm the next Lord Paddock or I'm the next Dinah Rose QC, but you can say, I've done this and I think that means that I have potential as an advocate or whatever. Yeah. You don't get points for modesty, is what I'm saying. And you can, exactly as you said, sell yourself without being, awful about it.
And you mentioned as well the Viva Voce examination. How did that go, or what's the process for that?
So you basically rock up exactly as you did to your GDL or BPTC scholarship interview if you had one, and you are given a little slip of paper. So you don't have to prepare anything, or certainly I didn't when I applied, in advance of the interview itself. And you get a little slip of paper and you've got 15 minutes, I think, or thereabouts to prepare it. And I'm sure I can say, and if, I can block it out if not, that in my year, the question was something like, are judges best placed to dictate or interpret what's in the public interest?
Right.
And you basically had to argue yes or no. So that's very familiar. It's exactly like the kind of thing you might have received at a pupillage interview or again at the scholarship interviews from before. And my advice for that is to try not to be boring. Everyone will know, and if you're at an interview, you will have a grasp of this, that you should try and present a structured argument, that you should try and make clear points backed by evidence, or at least, even if it's anecdotal, no one expects you to be a bank of statistics, but just try to be interesting. I felt that given the context at the time, there was a lot of sort of enemies of the people shtick going on in the papers, that the answer was potentially no, because, these things are political, so on and so forth, and judges are just about interpreting, not about dictating or whatever. But actually I just sort of said unambiguously yes, and then presented a kind of almost dramatically one-sided version of it. And I did that just because I was trying to express something that maybe wasn't the same as what they had heard from the previous 3 candidates. I'm not doing such a good job of recalling it now, but that was my basic approach to it. And that might not work for everyone, but I was just trying to say something interesting rather than, being accurate or being as nuanced as possible, because you only really have a few minutes to, as I say, sort of sell yourself as an advocate, and you want to be memorable, I think, for the right reasons.
Yes.
But yeah, in terms of preparing for it, I don't suppose that you can't sort of anticipate the topics. You can just sort of read the news,
Keep up
think
to
about
date.
things. Yeah, but don't, you can't go out of your way. And probably if you're doing pupillage, you'll be doing that anyway. Yeah.
So be memorable, again, without being
memorable.
intensely dislikable. It's a great tip.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's really hard to give advice about this kind of stuff because, a lot of it is kind of meaningless. You want to be yourself, you want to be memorable, you want to not be intensely dislikable. And that's quite hard to translate into how-to tips. I think it really boils down to you should trust yourself and your own judgment, and you shouldn't be thinking, oh, well, I heard, this person on this podcast one time saying that you should do this or you should do that, and so I'm going to just do it. If that's not your instinct, really it just boils down to trust your own ability.
I think that's incredibly useful advice, because especially when you're applying for a scholarship or pupillage or whatever it might be, it's very easy to look at people who have already succeeded in it and think, right, I've got to copy exactly what they're doing. So I think, definitely what you're saying is a lot more useful, I think, than very, very niche specific tips which might work for one person but not for another. It's be yourself, show off your achievements, and
don't be dislikable. Go for it. Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned that applications are open around now. They're opened in November and they close in January next year. What should applicants be doing now to prepare?
Well, so if you think about it, if you've got till January, you don't get brownie points for getting it in early. If you're the kind of person that needs to have peace of mind, then that's fine. I'm not one of you. I wish I were. But you've still got a bit of time. And so if you're looking at your application and you're thinking, oh, I don't know if I've quite got enough at the minute, you're probably wrong, because, as I say, people tend to underestimate their own achievements. But if you think, I could have something more. For instance, you didn't really do any mooting, you managed to coast into pupillage without it. Impressive, well done. But you might want to think about that, because some competitions are no doubt open to pupils. Or you might want to think of other ways you could show your ability as an advocate. And there are loads of ways to do that. Lots of voluntary opportunities, certainly. You can take through cases as a pupil if you've got time. And you may well do in your first 6. Not everyone is completely swamped. Or writing competitions. There are a million essay competitions, and they're not all, really famous and known about, like the Bar Council essay competition. If you do a little bit of research, there's an extradition competition, that kind of thing that maybe you might want to have a go at. You can be strengthening your application, basically, and also subtly sucking up to your supervisor, which I'm sure you're doing already, because that's just good pupilling.
Just so they know you're the exceptional candidate.
Yeah, exactly. Without, again, being obsequious or intensely dislikable. It's a fine line, but you've got to tread it.
And one that I'm sure people can manage to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. That was really useful.
Thanks for having me again, yeah.
And thank you to everybody for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Raising the Bar podcast. Please subscribe, rate and review. And for more information, check us out on Twitter at RaisingTheBarGI.